I like to consider myself a comic book expert, but I'm just not. I know infinitely more than your average person, but there's also going to be someone watching this who knows infinitely more than me, especially when it comes to particular characters, because if you're a fan of them, you're probably going to end up reading every comic that that character has, as well as everything that they might play a minor role in. Then again, that might just be me, because I go through plenty of crazy phases of reading every Daredevil or Batman run in existence and make myself go insane doing so. I was reading a particular Batman run that inspired me to make this video, and I'll talk about plenty more examples throughout, but this comic had a moment that was so convoluted and inexplicably tied to other multiverse spanning events that are even more convoluted, I had to take a step back and ask what in the world was going on. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, and superhero comics are confusing. But guess what? They've always been. Deal with it. Nah, it should be better, but that standard will only be less confusing if the entire industry is overhauled, and that's just not happening anytime soon. So honestly, yeah, we're just gonna have to deal with it. From Marvel's Return of the Ultimate Universe to DC's new absolute all-in branding, it's almost like these companies use these events to pull a stunt just controversial enough to bring eyes on them without losing too many of the diehard fans. But I'm jumping right to the conclusion. And before I even get to that Batman comic I mentioned earlier, I want to bring up another sometimes dark horned up hero, and I mean that in the exact way that it sounds. But anyway, I've been working on a Daredevil Born Again video, which would spell out my hopes for the show, and to get every bit of unnecessary context from story arc to story arc, I'm working my way through every single Daredevil or Daredevil tie-in comic, and it's been a lot of fun, only feeling like homework on the rarest of occasions. However, more than once I've had to defer to a reading guide to know what to read next when an arc ends. And even then, it's entirely unclear where to go. Sometimes, after hours of research, as if I was hacking into the mainframe or something, I would give up and just start at the next arc, but then immediately see some spoiler on the cover, ruining the previous story that I, until that very moment, didn't even know existed. And it's difficult enough trying to follow something in real time, but infinitely more so when diving into an epic event from the past, all of which have countless tie-ins and crossover issues that are made exhaustingly more convoluted when you consider that they must be read in a precise way. And it sucks because that should be as simple as reading it in its numbered order. But if you do that, there's a big chance you'll miss a separate side story or a key piece of background info in another crossover comic, vital to the overarching tale. Or the numbered order just isn't correct in the first place, and you'll end up getting yourself more confused. Sometimes you'll also get an omnibus that is ordered by the release date of each issue, and not in narrative order, which I guess I can understand if I'm thinking like a publisher, but as a reader, I never want an omnibus to be out of order. The whole reason I buy collections like that is for clear and efficient reading, and that's all without even mentioning that most runs, or at least the popular ones, have multiple titles releasing concurrently. We got the New 52 Superman and Batman, who had titles of their own with separate side adventures and their iconic surrounding characters, but on top of that, there was the New 52 Justice League run, which showed the whole team assembling, except they weren't the other New 52 versions. They were from another universe. Honestly, I still don't get it. I'm sure it's explained in Superman's run, but I fell off of that hard, so someone just explain it to me in the comments. But aside from that one example, all of these comic crossovers are named way too similarly, and these companies will way too quickly jump to launch a new line to start at issue number 1. But all that preamble to finally get to Batman, because it's not just blind optimism that I strictly follow for this channel in general. I will also happily excuse any flaws in a convoluted comic arc if I have fun with it. However, for this particular comic run, Batman Abyss, I was a bit too confused. I mean, it was just a single panel showing other stuff that had been happening, not Ghostmaker or anything, but I was still surprised and confused at how apparently out of touch I was with what was going on with DC lore. So confused, I caved and decided to risk seeing potential spoilers and just Googled it. And it was in that moment that I learned of some A-Day event that I have since gone back and read, because I needed to read that to get enough context to read another DC event, all so I could get back to Batman without any confusion. By the way, after reading every run and extra tie-in leading up to all that stuff, I figured out that I didn't have to do any of that, so it was kinda pointless. But whenever that happens, I do feel some embarrassment, because as I mentioned before, I like to consider myself the comic guy, yet I get that lost and confused feeling more than I care to admit when reading comics. There's incredible writers like Tom King and Al Ewing who use a character's complicated history and lore to build suspense in a story, but that is a very rare exception, because it is extremely difficult to walk that tightrope of using the sandbox of lore understood by the general public while also still leaving enough room for mystery and intrigue. Because that kind of narrative is hard to depict well, I'd much prefer it if the writers just acknowledge the previously convoluted lore, building off of it where they can, but ignoring it when they can't. Which seems like it would only add to how convoluted comics are, but that doesn't have to be the case with delicate and good writing. I'll bring up a great example from Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk later on, but one of the best examples of that are Grant Morrison's Justice League, his Batman, or his Spider-Man runs. And any good comic book writer has done this at some point as well, yet I've always considered Morrison the king of bringing back inexplicable and forgotten storylines and making them interesting and relevant. Whether that be a long-forgotten C-lister or a secret organization, if Morrison introduces some element that you've never heard of before, odds are it's a slightly rebooted look at something that hasn't been seen in comics for over 20 years. Just look at Zur and R. Yet for every genius usage of comic lore, there are 10 mind-boggling ones that will cause a stroke if attempted to be understood. And sometimes you read a few issues into a newer comic arc, and there's intrigue and a mystery that the comic just isn't telling you, but then later on you realize you were confused not because there was something to figure out in the story, but because you were missing context. That right there makes me not want to read comics. But on the flip side of that, once you do the work and read everything, learning every facet of that lore or just the necessary bits, that makes you feel like you're in on the joke when the lore comes back. Yet not everyone wants to do that homework, nor should they have to. So striking that balance of making a comic narrative complex with mystery and intrigue but remaining approachable is all the more vital. And that's the key, making it easy and convenient to access all of these different stories while also making it feel like you're in on the secrets and references. Naturally, amidst all of that, the stories also just have to be good, otherwise why would people be reading them? Because I know I am always just drawn to good stories, rather than sticking with a particular character or continuity. That doesn't really gel with the whole point I'm making, that a convoluted continuity can make sense with enough care and effort, but at the end of the day, I also just want to read interesting stories. I have unbreaking and almost self-deprecating loyalty to the OGs, but staying open-minded and willing to give anything new a try is how those new things become something. I am all for the status quo. I love seeing a younger Justice League. Maybe Superman has a son, maybe Batman has all of his Robins, and maybe there's a new legacy Flash or Green Lantern. But the whole framework for that world hasn't changed for the entire time that it's existed. Writers have attempted to shake things up with phenomenal stories that I do think will last, but within a year of those comics wrapping up, the same status quo will swing back around. And when that's combined with the non-stop crossovers and events and everything I talked about with all of those emerging complications, it becomes overwhelming. Take an incoming fan, for instance, eager and ready to dive into a favorite character of theirs or a story they'd heard was good, yet can be met with the crushing weight of years of elaborate interwoven arcs and reading orders that will need to be Googled, sometimes entirely discouraged by the insurmountable mountain of convoluted lore. And yet another reason why focus on quality alone is beyond important, and that all comes back around to the real solution behind making comics accessible and fun, which is building entertaining stories that incorporate the inexplicable lore in a fun tip-of-the-hat way without it being required for the reader to understand everything about it. And just as promised, it's time to bring up one of my all-time favorite examples of that, which of course is Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk. Containing a short arc pitting him against Zenmu, a weird mechanical yeti thing who is also a telepathic alien powerful enough to substantially Mandela affect the entire planet. And I saw Zenmu, thought it was a weird but fun design, and didn't think too much of it. But thanks to the research I was doing for this video, I happened upon the fact that Zenmu was named the Hulk in his first appearance, Journey into Mystery number 62, which came out a decade before the Hulk or his title comic appeared. Did I make this video simply so that I could point out that fun fact? I don't know, you tell me. But aside from that, I can't think of any better modern day cases to dive into than the Ultimate Universe and DC's Absolute runs. And I've already mentioned those multiple times in some of my other videos because I couldn't help but bring them up, but both of them do a fantastic job of changing the status quo, introducing a compelling story, and keeping it accessible. The Ultimate Universe is considerably more reliant on you knowing previous lore or doing the homework and reading all of Jonathan Hickman's runs for context, though it isn't required. The Absolute Universe, on the other hand, has some weird alternate universe explanation with Doomsday, but understanding that is almost discouraged. Whatever is needed to be comprehended from each limited series is given in that issue so that the story can focus on just giving us a cool variation of a hero we know. And that's probably just a result of it, as of yet, tying together, and I'm sure when it eventually does, it'll become just as complicated and convoluted as the rest. But right now, you could theoretically have never read or heard anything about DC, and these runs could still make sense. Of course, there isn't a person alive who doesn't already know about Superman or Batman, probably, and the comics were written with the reader's understanding of that lore in mind, playing with the common tropes and character dynamics we're familiar with. But I think these stories might work just as well completely divorced from any of that. I should also take this time to stand on my own imaginary soapbox and declare how DC's Absolute Universe is surprisingly great across the board. I expected Batman to be okay, but then it turned out to be excellent. And after that, I waited for one of the other Trinity issues to be bad, but they were both just as great. I have no clue how any of it is going to come together, but I can't wait for more of what we've got, and for the release of more Absolute characters. There's probably a bunch that I'm not aware of, but the small peeks we've gotten of Wally West and Martian Manhunter have me so excited. And I could get into the politics of the Absolute Universe, which to me is why these runs have been so special, but I'll keep it at these books clearly have something to say about the state of the world. And if you want to hear me diving into why I personally think superheroes and art in general is great when it's woke, or whatever term toxic fans want to use, then check out this video I made about why so many people hate She-Hulk, because that's not what I'm here to talk about today. The point I do want to conclude on, with how convoluted comics are and how insurmountable they feel to jump into, it's important to wrap up on how they always have been. It's not any reason to disregard the idea of event storylines or the medium in general, but I can see how it's discouraging. Yet the only possible solution that I could see would be to lessen the innumerable amount of tie-ins. Although even I can admit that when I lock in and read all of those periphery issues, it can be a lot of fun. Plus, these comic companies are never going to stop pumping out as much as they can, inevitably flooding us all with too much to keep up with, because it's making them money. And until it doesn't, they'll keep on trucking along. So, moral of the story, jump in whenever. Find good stories. Just have fun. But what are your thoughts on how convoluted and headache-inducing comics can be? Is there a particular story that made you lose interest in reading company-wide crossovers or unending issues being released with popular characters? Is there a story that gives you faith that all can be done well? Drop a comment and let me know. And thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for video essays on or before every Saturday, reviews whenever I'm able to watch something, and as always, enjoy a delicious sandwich.